Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 14, Episode 93. He's Josh Carney. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us here this Friday. Steelers Nation, Dave Bryan still on vacation up in Boston right about now, visiting Steelers Depot team member Joe Clark. And so he's having a good time. They went to Fenway, took a tour of the ballpark yesterday. So Josh Carney, as always, is filling in throughout the week here. Dave should be back on Monday, I believe, but Josh is here. And we really thank you, Josh, for hanging out with us and filling in again.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Yeah, it's kind of funny hearing Dave say 42 degrees is cold. You and I, this is a great spring day.
Yeah.
Dave's over here acting like, Jack Nicholson in the, what movie was that where he was freezing?
Oh, don't ask me about movies.
I know we're awful with it, but yeah, Dave's acting like it's below freezing. So that got a good chuckle out of me.
For sure. But again, he should be back on Monday's show, I believe, and we'll kind of reset from there. Again, there was no Wednesday shows. I'm sure you guys have noticed by now, but there wasn't a lot of news that was happening that would have occurred on Tuesday night. We record these things with Josh and I the day before. We are recording this here Thursday around 5 p.m. So as always, if something were to break and from now until you guys listen to this, then that'll be the reason why we did not cover it. And it's a good thing we really didn't do a Wednesday show because we would not have had the chance to talk about Pittsburgh rounding out its coaching staff here with a couple of hires and reorganizations, new titles for the team, and a new strength and conditioning coach was added in. So the big news here from Pittsburgh since last time we spoke, Josh, was Mike Sullivan officially has his new title. We knew something was going to give and change once the team hired Tom Arth to be the quarterback's coach earlier, I believe, this month. Sullivan was initially still listed as the quarterback's coach, a position he's held since being hired in 2021. Now he's the senior offensive assistant. And then another new hire being added to the organization is Matt Baker, who will carry the title of just offensive assistant. So, Josh, your thoughts here. Let's start with Sullivan in terms of what that might mean. We don't know what it means. They've not commented on it yet, but how do you interpret this change of title from Sullivan going from quarterback's coach to senior offensive assistant?
I'm assuming he's just going to have a larger say in a lot of the position groups, maybe bounce around here and there. I mean, the guy's been in the league forever. He's worked with a lot of really good players. He's seen it all. He's done it all. I'm not comparing him to, like a John Mitchell or anything like that, but this kind of has that feel of like, okay, you're well respected within this locker room. You're well respected within the league. We're going to keep you on here. You can kind of input your ideas and, step in and coach where you see fit. And I said this before on a recent show. I like that they were retaining him in some form or fashion. He's got a lot of respect from Kenny Pickett. If Mason Rudolph is retained, Mason Rudolph has spoken highly of him. We know how Mike Tomlin feels about him, and I thought he did well calling plays there in the second half of the season when he took on that interim tag. I'm glad he's sticking within the Steeler organization, and the senior offensive assistant role, that kind of felt like that was coming in general. He was going to get a broad overarching title, and it feels like he's just kind of going to be allowed to bounce wherever he wants and just have his hand in a lot of the piles offensively, at least from my vantage point.
No, I think you're right. And I agree. I'm happy that Sullivan stayed. And I saw a lot of avenues in which he could leave. He interviewed to become the OC for the Raiders and for the Saints. And I just think if you're Sullivan, I don't know where he stood contractually, but if he wanted to go, the team might have been able to oblige, because if you don't get any consideration to remain the OC after I think you called a decent back half of the season games overall, I thought his play calling was fine and an improvement over Matt Canada, to get no consideration there and then lose running the quarterback room to this kind of vague catch-all offensive assistant title. I wouldn't be too happy about that personally, but I'm glad he's there. I think he's a good coach. I think he's got a good track record. Players have spoken highly of him. Rudolph, as you mentioned, Eli Manning's vouched for him in the past. Now, what does this title mean? Again, hard to say. Typically, when the team releases their upcoming year's media guide, there'll be some sort of explanation for what that role may entail. It's broad in general, but a little bit more than just the actual title. I assume it's just going to be kind of what you said, just helping where help is needed. And in terms of game planning and tape study, he may handle a certain project from week to week and just kind of be another voice in that room. So some have said this is a promotion. Again, I can't speak definitively if it is or not. I don't really view it as a promotion, though, when you no longer get to run the most important room of the team, the quarterback room, and now you're just this catch-all assistant. To me, that's not a promotion, that's a demotion. You kind of seen that happen in the scouting staff as well. You look at Phil Kreidler, Kelvin Fisher, they had more official titles, and then when Omar Khan came in, they became senior scouting assistants and less so of what they were, what their titles were before. So, what that role will be and how they will all work together, we'll see. But to your point, I'm happy that Sullivan is staying.
Yeah, and I hope out of this he got some sort of raise. Maybe it's not a promotion as far as responsibility goes, but I hope that the Steeler organization kind of took care of him a bit and gave him a little bit of a raise, considering the role he took on in the middle of last year after Matt Canada was fired, and then obviously, as you mentioned, he had an opportunity to look elsewhere for jobs. You mentioned Vegas and New Orleans. Obviously, those didn't work out. And I don't want to say Pittsburgh was the final landing spot for him, like he had no other options. But I do hope that the Steelers, in giving him this senior offensive assistant role, gave him a bit of a raise, just considering what he had to do last year and how respected he is.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, they could have just reworked the title. I don't know for sure where he was at contractually. If he was under contract and just trying to leave may have been more of an issue, unless he was going to get a promotion, like becoming the OC somewhere, which did not occur. I would say generally and typically in Pittsburgh, the coordinators signed 3-year deals. We know Arthur Smith got a 3-year deal. I know Terrell Austin only got a 2-year deal, but there may be an age component to that where he wanted to do 2 years. And typically, positional coaches will get 2-year contracts. I know Eddie Faulkner's been getting 2-year deals pretty repeatedly to run that running backs room. So if Sullivan was hired in 2021, that means he had a 2-year deal from 21 and 22, probably re-upped on a 2-year deal for the 2023 season. So I think there's a educated guess he's extended through or signed through 2024. So I wonder if he's going to be with this team post 2024. My guess, and it's a complete guess with the whole season ahead of us, is that he will not be with this team in post 2024 for the 2025 season. But that's just a guess. But that's my read of it, is that the Sullivan didn't have any other great alternatives. They still valued him. They didn't value him enough to keep him as the quarterback's coach, and that says something.
For sure, yeah. You could be spot on that. Maybe he's a little upset he's not running the quarterback room at this point, getting passed over for a guy much younger with less experience and less of a reputation. Right. But Sullivan has always seemed like the ultimate professional. I don't think this is going to be an issue, and I'm just thrilled he's still on the offensive staff. I think his resume, his reputation within the NFL, and his standing within that quarterback room from a respect standpoint can go a long way.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be an issue in that room. I don't think Sullivan's going to create waves.
No.
He's Army background. I think he understands about playing your role and doing your part. But you have to wonder if he had an honest conversation, if he's happy with how this offseason has gone. My guess, and again, just a guess, is probably not. Some people have said the coaching staff, they've expanded the coaching staff. They have not. Last year they had 10 offensive coaches. This year they currently sit at 10 offensive coaches. Now, could they add somebody and hire somebody else? Certainly that's possible. And I think it's important to note as well, the turnover. They've turned over half that room. There's been 5 people have exited, including Matt Canada, and 5 new hires have been made, including Matt Baker, offensive assistant, who was not officially announced by the team, but posted on the front office page of Steelers.com earlier this week, I believe on Wednesday. So Baker's a guy that we're all kind of learning more about. He's got a ton of ties to Arthur Smith and even some kind of pseudo ties to Tom Arth, the new quarterbacks coach. With Baker, he was teammates with Arthur Smith at North Carolina in college. Baker was a quarterback, Smith an offensive lineman. They coached together for 1 year in 2010 at Ole Miss. And then most notably, Smith hired Baker in 2023 with the Falcons to be, I think, an assistant special teams coach. Now his title in Pittsburgh is offensive assistant. I can surmise he'll be working with the quarterbacks maybe more than other position groups, but an interesting name there in Matt Baker.
Very interesting name. And the thing that I found really unique was this guy was out of football for a few years. He was in the energy sector, as you had in your article. And yeah, I mean, just a really unique hire here. But as you pointed out in your article, there are a lot of very key ties to Arthur Smith and Tom Arth. Makes all the sense in the world. And it's good to have a former NFL quarterback. And even if he never took a snap, just bouncing around, it's good to have that type of guy on the coaching staff that has been there. He's been in those rooms. He's been through those practices, and he has such a good relationship with the offensive coordinator. So any way you can continue to solidify that message from the offensive coordinator on down to the players is a good move. And yeah, this kind of came out of nowhere. I don't think any of us had heard of Matt Baker before he was listed on Steelers.com. No disrespect to Matt Baker, but yeah, this is interesting. I'm excited to see what his impact could be and what his role will be. Because again, you mentioned he's just listed as an offensive assistant, and what will his role be? We'll probably have to wait till the media guide comes out.
Yeah, and again, it's going to be pretty general. I mean, just helping in the game planning, film study, cut up. Again, they may have special assignments. Typically, when you talk about creating a scouting report, one coach might look at red zone personnel, or there may be a list of things you look at in terms of formations and motions and how teams adjust. I mean, there's a long list of things that go into that scouting report, and one person, the OC alone, is not compiling that. It's certainly a whole staff's work to be able to put the whole picture together. The kind of pseudo connection to Arth is they've never worked directly together, but Baker, as you said, he was out of football for almost a decade, came back in 2019 at Western Michigan, and then in 2020 got hired as the OC quarterbacks coach at John Carroll University, which is where Tom Arth played college football and was a longtime head coach there. Again, they did not work together directly, but I'm assuming that Tom Arth probably knows a bit about Matt Baker from Baker's time at John Carroll.
I would imagine, yeah. I mean, John Carroll, they're not known for churning out a ton of NFL talent, but that coaching circle there is pretty tight. Yeah. It's right there with Mount Union, so that's quite the rivalry there. And I'm sure Arth knew all about Baker, especially with his resume within the football industry at the college level before getting to John Carroll.
Yeah, and if Baker is going to be having a helping hand with the quarterbacks, then that relationship with Arth is going to be, I think, all the more important there, or at least the foundations of it. Now, could they go hire an assistant quarterbacks coach? They technically don't have somebody to fill that after David Corley, no longer with the team. I don't know if he left or they parted ways, whatever the situation was there. So again, could they go hire somebody? That is certainly possible. We know that the guys that left, Matt Tomshaw was a quality control coach. And then Glenn Thomas, who was an offensive assistant, he carried that kind of catch-all title. He left to go to Nebraska to reunite with Matt Rule. They had links together in the college ranks. And so in some sense, Baker and the other assistant that was hired, Mateo, I think it's Camby. I'm probably butchering that. I have to look up the pronunciation on that. Those guys might be filling more of the Tom Show roles, so they could still have another hire. But whatever it's worth, in 2022, they had 9 offensive coaches. In 2023, 10. They sit at 10 currently. So if they do add somebody, it probably would be one more name, likely assistant quarterbacks coach, or maybe some sort of that, Bill Walsh fellowship kind of situation. But I think they're mostly done making their hires offensively.
Yeah, and you had a great point. A lot of people have been saying, hey, this is a bigger offensive staff. It's not. It's right. Just different. And in a good, you had a really good article up, I believe, was it Wednesday? I think you had it up about it being a different offensive staff, or maybe it was Thursday morning.
Yeah, Thursday morning, yep.
Okay, so, yeah, I mean, it feels like a more modern offensive staff at this point. You've got younger minds. You've got guys that are bringing different things to the table. And I think a lot of these guys fit what Smith is looking for. And, after the struggles that this Steelers offense has had the last, 3 years with Matt Canada's fingerprints all over it, you had to change it out. And, looking at it on paper right now, it feels like the Steelers have done a very good job of doing that. And they've got some interesting names to kind of keep an eye on. And we'll see, like you mentioned, if they add another name or two here. I would imagine an assistant quarterback coach could be that person. But yeah, it's not a bigger staff. It's just different, and different in a good way.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily a Canada's fingerprints thing, because he didn't bring in, if it was like Arthur Smith, there's a lot more hires happening in his year than Canada got in his year in which he was promoted. But just the general vibe of this offense has not worked in several seasons. And you have to probably change everything and look at everything, at least certainly examine it. And coaching staff is going to be a component of that. So, you don't want just change for the sake of change, but I do think it was probably needed just because, you're just not getting the results that you're looking for and really, frankly, need.
Yeah, you couldn't really run it back with the same offensive coaching staff outside of changing the coordinator. That you just couldn't do it. And, I think that they've made the moves that they needed. And it seemed like, again, on paper, they haven't done anything on a practice field at this point. But on paper, they look more intriguing, I should say, moving forward than they have in recent years.
Now, what coaching hires could be left? We mentioned assistant quarterbacks coach. That's possible unless Baker's going to wear that hat. Again, we'll have to wait and see. I still am expecting an assistant defensive backs coach to get brought in at some point because Gerald Alexander, we know it's been officially updated on the team site. He has left for the Raiders to take the safeties coach job there with Antonio Pierce. And they have had two DBs coaches for, I guess, since trying to think back when that started. I think Terrell Austin, I guess, technically with Tom Bradley in 2019, even though Austin was the assistant, but you could, on the field, he was running that room. Like Bradley was clearly no longer in charge. But then, since then they've had always at least one assistant. So I assume they're going to hire somebody, or at least have somebody in mind to help out Grady Brown.
Yeah, you would think. I mean, obviously, I don't remember or knowing about Alexander until this past year when his name surfaced for an article. But they would have to bring in someone to kind of help Grady Brown just based off of the way it has been the last few years with the Steelers organization. It's a larger position group defensively. You got a lot of young players there that you're trying to develop, and having an extra set of hands to help Grady Brown would be key. And obviously Alexander got a promotion elsewhere. The Steelers were very slow on updating that on the website, so it gave us some confusion. But yeah, that would be one position to watch on the coaching staff that they could fill here in the next few months.
Yeah, you make the point. They never told us about Alexander, so maybe there's somebody we just never really find out about. Because I think for Alexander started maybe midway through 2022, or sometime in 2022, either in the beginning or he was kind of hired halfway through, and then was never officially acknowledged by the team until 2023. So point is, if they don't have somebody yet, I think they will have somebody, even if we don't ultimately really get a feel for who that name is. But hopefully they will at least announce it, at least post it on the website for us to know.
Yeah, because Alexander followed Flores, correct? Because he was in Miami with him, or
I think you're right.
There were ties to Flores somehow, and we never heard about him until this past season. It was like, oh yeah, assistant DB coach. It's like, wait a minute, when did that come up? But we'll see if they replace that fill that hole there. But as I said, as offensively as we sit here right now, I like the coaching staff in general. They made some solid changes, and it feels refreshing for the Steelers right now.
I know it's maybe not the most exciting topic to discuss some of the offensive assistants, and it's hard to really know what their impact, will look like and what it'll ultimately be. And of course, the players have to execute and develop, and so much rides on the quarterback position. But it's the news of the day right now. There isn't a ton going on until the combine picks up next week. And by the way, we are officially credential approved. We have 3 people going to the combine: Jonathan Heitrader, Ross McCorkle, and Joe Clark will have boots on the ground in Indy. Omar Khan will speak Tuesday morning, and so hopefully those guys will get to be part of that interview process, and certainly we'll get to talk to the players and interview the 321 prospects who will be at the combine. So really looking forward to that.
For sure, yeah, it's always a great time to get that info from the combine, and I'm excited for Ross to get that experience. I know Joe and Jonathan have done it before, but I think Ross is going to have a blast there in Indy.
For sure. You mentioned that the team was slow to update the Alexander departure. I don't want to say they were slow about it, but they took about a week to officially release offensive tackle Chukwuma Okorafor. I've gotten some questions about that because that was announced, I guess, last Monday, and then Mitch Trubisky and Presley Harvin were shown on the actual transaction log on Tuesday, the following day of them being released. Trubisky's contract terminated, Harvin waived because he wasn't a vested veteran. But Okorafor was nowhere to be found, and it took until, when was it? Was that Monday, Wednesday? I'm getting the days mixed up at this point.
I believe it was Monday because no, it was Tuesday because I wrote 8 days. So from the 12th to the 20th. It took 8 days.
Okay, so he has officially now been released. Now, why it took that long, I don't know. Obviously, there was some discussion, some thought. Could they be trying to work out a trade? Typically, when you hear these, reports and sources about a guy getting released, and it doesn't happen, there may be some last-second discussion to trade the guy, to flip him for something. But for it to take, over a week for that to occur, I don't know if there was not having trade talks for a week about Chukwuma Okorafor. I don't think that it's a pretty short conversation, I would think. So I don't know if that was a procedural thing or somebody just not in town. I mean, Omar was at the HBCU Combine. I don't know. But point is, he's now officially been released.
Yeah, it was very strange how long it was taking. The initial thought, as you mentioned, was, okay, maybe they're working on a trade. But as that stretched into 3 days and 4 days and on, it was it's like, okay, something odd is going on. The February 20th transaction sheet was very interesting. But yeah, he's shown the door. They saved some money there, and they will be in the market for either a veteran offensive lineman in free agency or in the draft, or both.
I think both is a distinct possibility, although whatever it's worth, Jerry Dulac had an article or a comment or something to that effect that the team is still confident in Dan Moore, and was at least, I think, implying that they could run it back with Moore at left tackle and Jones at right tackle for 2024.
Yeah, his words were they have their starting tackles, and that was in a chat to readers yesterday, Wednesday. So I know that ruffled some feathers, but yeah, that seems to be the vibe Dulac is getting. But we know, and I think everyone else knows, that the Steelers have a need along the offensive line and specifically at tackle still.
Right. Going back to some of the coaching hires, just to touch on it briefly, because there was also a big turnover with the strength and conditioning and some of the support staff in terms of Marcel Pastor, longtime strength and conditioning coach. He had left earlier this year, the team hiring 3 individuals. And I always got to work on the pronunciation of these guys. Phil Matsus, I'm probably saying that pretty incorrectly, but he's now the head strength and conditioning coach, formerly at Boston College. I believe he spent some time at Ohio State as well, Western PA native, and so he's kind of coming back to his home roots there. And then an assistant strength and conditioning coach, Justice Gallick, and a sports science coordinator, also listed under that strength and conditioning header, of Roderick Moore. Our Tony Calderon on Thursday had a pretty interesting article about Moore and kind of his background in philosophy. So just want to make some notes there as well. And Garrett Guimont still remains the senior conditioning coordinator, who's been with the team for, I think, since 2007. Been a long, long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did find the Matsus, or how we'll have to figure out how we say his name. They've hired some coaches with odd names at this point, but he actually played under Gallick at Villanova. Gallick was the head strength and conditioning coach at Villanova from 2005 to 2012, and Phil Matsus was at Villanova as a player while Gallick was there. So connection there that I found while we were kind of researching those guys, and that's very interesting that they're going to be working again. This time with Matthews as Gallick's boss. So, but yeah, good to see the Western PA guy come home. Matthews was born in Beaver and then moved to Greenville and went to Greenville High School in Mercer County. So, yeah, local boy comes home. It's a cool story.
For sure. All right. Some other news here. That was kind of the biggest headline overall. Some things that came across the wire on Thursday, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter and Jeremy Fowler. The Kansas City Chiefs are signing Matt Araiza as their offseason punter. Tommy Townsend, their star punter, a pending free agent. So we'll see if that means Townsend is on the outs or not. But Araiza has been talked about a lot in Pittsburgh circles for, obviously, especially once a team released Presley Harvin, but even before then about, the punting ability that he had, a really exciting punter out of San Diego State known as the Punt God, drafted by the Bills, had the sexual assault allegations, gets released. The story appears to be untrue, kind of unravels, charges and everything kind of drops, lawsuits against him, kind of exonerates him of any wrongdoing, had a workout with the Jets, but had been left unsigned until Thursday, when the Chiefs reportedly were in the process of signing him. So I know some Steeler fans are very upset about that. They're missing out on Matt Araiza.
Yeah, they are. And, obviously his name was cleared of any wrongdoing in that incident. And obviously he was sitting there on the street as a free agent this entire time. And, fans were clamoring for that guy even when Harvin was on the roster. And then the Steelers made that move to release Percy Harvin, and Matt Araiza's name continued to gain steam. I believe Pat McAfee mentioned him as, a potential fit for the Steelers. And obviously that has not happened. The Chiefs jumped at that opportunity to maybe save some money at the punting position and get a guy who might be a bit more talented than Tommy Townsend. Tommy Townsend will be on the free agent market as an unrestricted free agent. He's one of the best punters in football, and the Steelers have a need. So they're I'm not trying to say there's anything going on there, but there could be a connection. But yeah, Araiza signing with the Chiefs on Thursday, that certainly has many Yinzers upset.
Yeah, and I think the question is, why did it take this long for Araiza to get signed? And I don't, know for sure. I mean, some of this was happening, I think, more mid-season. I haven't followed the timeline exactly of everything against Araiza. My guess is, and I had mentioned this, I think, on a live stream, that there were still, although, again, he was exonerated, and I'm not blaming Araiza for this, there is still that baggage he'll bring of the story and some of the reaction to it. And so I think for the Chiefs to do it in the offseason, where it won't be any sort of distraction, players won't have to talk about it, coaches won't have to talk about it, it'll kind of get forgotten about by a couple months from now when everyone returns for OTAs and spring ball. Probably a motivation for teams to wait until the offseason to make a move like that. But with Tommy Townsend, I mean, you lose out on Araiza, but if Townsend's available, Pittsburgh, I think, has got to at least consider that. I don't know what the contract will be. It won't be, super, super cheap. He's a great punter, but man, watch that Super Bowl. I mean, Townsend had such an impact on that game. Both punters were MVPs until the final couple minutes when Mahomes went off and, won that game, sent it to overtime, and then won it. So, yeah, I mean, Pittsburgh, I think they need to have an ace punter, whether you do that through the draft, through a Torrey Taylor, a Ryan Reckow from BYU, or for agent route. I think you got to find somebody that can really become an ace of that unit.
Yeah, I just looked it up. Matt Araiza last worked out with the Jets in May of 2023. So he didn't have any workouts during this past season. And I think it was mid-season where he was officially cleared. So unclear why it took so long for him to land a job, but happy that he has got a shot in the NFL again. Unfortunately, it's with the Chiefs. It feels like the rich get richer. But on the flip side with Townsend, I did look up the highest paid punter in football right now makes just over 3.6 million on average. So that's not something that's going to break the bank if that's what Townsend's looking for. And he's certainly got the track record in the NFL as one of the best punters, and just put on that Super Bowl. I mean, he was absolutely fantastic the way he was able to flip the field and pin those guys deep.
Who is the highest punter? Did you have the name in terms of who that was in association with the salary?
Let me pull up the link again.
AJ Cole. I'm just trying to think about Fox, Dixon. I don't know who's all gotten deals done and who's got deals coming.
Yeah, Michael Dixon in Seattle, $3.674 million. So
okay,
and he signed a 4-year, $14.5 million extension in June of 2021. So he's been the highest paid punter for 3 seasons now, and that market really hasn't moved. So we'll see. I mean, Townsend probably will surpass that on the free agent market. I mean, he's an absolute weapon. He was the captain for the Chiefs, all of that. So we'll see. But that takes away one landing spot for Townsend and might open up one even larger in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, if Dixon has been the highest paid punter for multiple seasons, then I think Townsend's going to look for, not just to edge past that number, but I think, maybe I'm just guessing, but in that 5 million type of range to really truly reset the market. And I don't know what punters might be available, or I shouldn't say available, but in terms of pending free agents who might get re-signed. I was looking at Ryan Stonehouse in Tennessee because he's been among the NFL's best and he's still under contract, I think, through the next year or two. So again, we'll see. I know today's show's not the most exciting top line topics of coaching staff and punters, but it's what we do around here.
Important stuff.
And listen, people really wanted Matt Araiza to come to Pittsburgh, and I wouldn't have been mad about it. I'm not losing sleep over him not coming to Pittsburgh. But I think the broader and bigger point that I probably would agree with Steeler fans is they got to find an ace punter. You've seen the benefit of having an ace kicker. You got to find a punter that can flip the field.
They have to. I mean, they've tried to patchwork it too often in the past. Jordan Berry was a guy that it felt like they were always searching for upgrades. And he would always kind of win the job in a sense. And then obviously Harvin comes in. They tried Braden Mann last year, though I don't think that was truly a punting competition in training camp. But you can speak more broadly to that since you were there every day. But you can't continue to just skate by the punter position. You have to find the answer, whether that's free agency, whether that's in the draft, like I kind of made the case for last week. You have to do it, and you don't have to look any further than the last 4 teams that were standing in the playoffs. They all had solid punters. The Super Bowl, as you mentioned earlier, punting changed that game until Patrick Mahomes just took off and went into MVP mode. So, I'm not losing sleep over Matt Araiza. His agency made it sound like he had a few offers in their statement.
Oh, really?
So
we don't. I didn't even see the statement. What did they?
It was just thanking. It was just thanking the Chiefs, for giving him the opportunity. It's something he's been working for, and he picked this opportunity to go chase championships. So that line kind of implied he kind of had options to choose from, which that wouldn't shock me, especially with his name being cleared. And as you mentioned, it's the offseason. Guys are away from the facility. Coaches are, away and all that and focused on the draft. So I don't think people are going to be focusing on a punting signing all that much, though Araiza is a bigger name. But yeah, back to the Steeler point, they have to get this figured out. And I don't want to see a cheap free agency signing or a waiver claim or whatever it may be. Go out and fix the hole.
I think you said it well. You can't skate by. Not a punter for other teams. Heck, the Chiefs have a great punter and they have a great offense. This year wasn't that great, but generally speaking, they've had a fantastic offense and they even understand and know and acquire the value of a top tier punter. So if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for Pittsburgh. And yeah, they can't skate by. And if it's a draft pick, and then we kind of had the conversation before, we'll have it again, I'm sure. I'm fine with using even a 4th round pick on a punter. If it's a Torrey Taylor or Reckow, that is a starter. One of your starters. And, in the 4th round, you're typically not drafting a starter right away. Hopefully somebody that becomes that and can contribute, obviously rotational type stuff, but you're drafting a starter in the 4th round. I'm good with that. Of course, though, if you do that, and Pittsburgh has in the past with Daniel Sepulveda, which was working out pretty well until I think he blew out his knee and had a bunch of issues there. But if you do make that investment, you better get it right. There is no margin for error there.
Well said. I'm spot on in lockstep with you.
All right, what else do we have to talk about? I know we're both, and probably a lot of us, are kind of quarterback discussioned out at this point, but it is still really the dominant offseason story for Pittsburgh until all these dominoes fall in terms of where these guys end up or don't end up. Terry Bradshaw, though, to bring it back to who's on the roster right now, Bradshaw was on the Rich Eisen show Thursday, and Eisen asked him really point blank, who do you believe should be the Steelers starter in 2024? And Bradshaw very confidently went to bat for Kenny Pickett and said, essentially that he should be the guy. And the focus should be not on replacing Kenny Pickett, but building around Kenny Pickett. He said, quote, "I love Pickett. Kenny Pickett is, I'll tell you what, Rich, I know him well. He's fiercely competitive. He's a tough-minded kid. Things don't bother him. I really like him a lot." And then later on went to say, that trading for Justin Fields would be a mistake. He said a huge mistake. Quote, "You don't need Fields. Stay with what you got. Just build Pickett up. Get him another receiver. Get him another explosive tight end." And then went on to talk about the need to improve the offensive line and protect him. So Bradshaw making it very clear he is Team Pickett.
Yeah, and that's not surprising. He's spoken highly of Pickett in the past. The only issue I have with Bradshaw's comments were, get him talent around him. I don't think Pickett is lacking playmakers around him. I think obviously the offensive line has been an issue at times. There's no denying that, but Pickett has also had a hand in that with some of his pocket presence and awareness. But it felt like Terry was making it out that the Steelers are severely lacking talent around Pickett and haven't done a good job giving him pieces to succeed with. They've got a good 1-2 punch at running back. Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, a very solid duo at receiver. They added Allen Robinson, who was experienced. Granted, he didn't really produce, but wasn't quite used properly. Same with Calvin Austin III. We like their tight end room. Pat Fryermuth's going to get probably going to get an extension this summer. Build up the offensive line around him, but Pickett he's not lacking talent around him. So I understand where Terry's coming from. That's how he's felt about Kenny Pickett for the last year or so. It doesn't sit well with me, Alex, him saying, he needs more talent around him. At some point, Kenny has to make plays, and he hasn't made plays.
Yeah, I can sympathize with Bradshaw's comments. I mean, he's a guy that was a first round pick that struggled his first couple seasons and got benched. And I'm sure there were some people in 1971, even early parts of 1972, wondering if Bradshaw would ever be the guy if it was time to move on and go find somebody else. So not that I'm calling Pickett Bradshaw, and obviously the Steelers are rebuilding their roster and they're not, analogous situations, but I think that's probably the perspective that Bradshaw approaches this with. And I also understand that, again, mentioned this on the last show, Pickett, to be fair to him, really did not have a run game throughout the first 8 weeks of the season. And even when it got going, he still needed to play better. And it wasn't, where the run game got going and he was amazing. But I do know that was a stress and a strain because the run game did not find its footing until the back half of the season, of which Pickett missed the majority of that. So, I mean, I do think that's one aspect with this run game, this offense. They have to start much faster, and Pickett's involved in the fast start, but just the run game itself, they can't, just be stuck in the mud for the first half of the year as they were in 2022 and 2023, because that is going to impact the quarterback play.
100%. Yeah. This past season, I mean, the run game was awful to start the year. They had no run game against San Francisco and had to abandon it pretty quickly because the defense couldn't stop them. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. But yeah, I mean, I think that this offense has to start faster. Arthur Smith has to have a game plan that allows them to get off to fast starts, and Kenny Pickett has to be able to execute. There was the discussion there at one point in the middle of the season that plays were there for Pickett to make in the passing game, and he wasn't making them in Matt Canada's system. So, I don't want to place all the blame on Kenny Pickett. That's not what I'm trying to do, but he's also not absolved of some of that criticism, or have, sort of, I don't want to call it a crutch, but an argument for him not having talent around him, so he's not in a position to succeed, which felt like what Terry was trying to do.
Yeah, and so it's just interesting though to get Bradshaw's perspective and his input.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't see a lot of people, especially in the media, backing Kenny Pickett. I think most of, maybe I don't know what the percentage is, but a lot of them are more intrigued by going to get a Justin Fields or Kirk Cousins or Russell Wilson or Mason Rudolph and allowing him to be the starter. There aren't many out there who are really banging the table to let Kenny Pickett develop. And so for Bradshaw to say that, I think it's pretty notable.
Yeah, and there were the comments today from on Thursday from Tim Hasselbeck. I was considered pro-ready coming out. He had more than 50 career starts in college and 24 starts into his NFL career, and we're not seeing it. So that might be the argument against him, but I think Pickett should get the first half of 2024 with Arthur Smith, with a reshaped offensive line, whether that's adding an offensive tackle or an upgrade at center. Let him get an opportunity with Arthur Smith. And I think you had it earlier in the week. The national media and even most of the local media is driving this infatuation with Justin Fields more than the Steelers might be. From the Steelers' perspective, it's Kenny Pickett and insert veteran ex-quarterback here for a competition. And a trade for Fields like we've talked about, Kenny Pickett would not be starting. He would be the backup. So,
right.
I appreciate Terry's perspective because, like you mentioned, he went through struggles as a first-round pick. He got benched. He kind of butted heads with Chuck Noll very famously, and things turned out for the better. But we'll see if that happens with Kenny Pickett now that he has a new offensive coordinator in Arthur Smith.
Right. So interesting input there. And the conversation will continue kind of recapping the quarterback talk since we last had the podcast on Monday. Chad Johnson, Ocho Cinco, whatever he's going by these days, says a little birdie told him that Russell Wilson was going to come to Pittsburgh. Is that true? Who the heck knows? I guess we'll see. Didn't provide any other evidence behind that. Justin Fields did an interview with the St. Brown brothers for the 33rd Team podcast, and he says he wants to stay in Chicago, wants to remain a Bear, does not want to be traded, but also said, whatever happens, keep me, trade me. I just want this to be over. He just wants a decision and some clarity on his future, which is understandable. So, what would you expect him to say is kind of what the retort some people have said. Of course, he would say that. I don't know. I mean, he unfollowed the Bears, so he's kind of maybe shown some, I don't know, strong arming or some discontent, although he claims he just didn't want to see their feed on vacation. I don't know how much the Bears are talking about drafting Caleb Williams and trading Justin Fields. I don't think the Bears official account is doing that, but all right, we'll go with it. And he was also, I think, pretty candid throughout that whole interview. He wasn't like, super player speak and buttoned up and I'll just say all the right things. He was, I think, pretty honest overall. So I think he's genuine when he wants to say he wants to stay in Chicago, but I think he's also, obviously genuine when he says, I just want to know where I'm going. Am I staying? Am I going? Just let's figure this thing out. He will probably have to wait a bit longer.
Yeah, and I don't blame him. As a player, you want to feel wanted, and it feels like a majority of the fans, at least that I've seen online from Bears fans, is they're excited for Caleb Williams. They're ready to move on from Justin Fields. You see reporters saying all this stuff about Caleb Williams, and Fields is kind of there like, hey, I'm still on the roster. I had a pretty solid 2023 season, and he's in limbo. And I get that feeling of whatever happens, just have it happen so I can move on with my life. We'll see what happens. I would be shocked if he's not traded by the start of free agency. Just because you're going to have teams that are going to meet with agents and stuff at the combine. You might see something after the combine when it comes to Justin Fields. I can't see Ryan Poles, the Bears GM, holding on to Fields through free agency and leading up to the draft with, all that capital. So we'll see. But yeah, I enjoyed the interview with Fields. I thought he was pretty candid. And I like that he said that he enjoyed playing in Pittsburgh, even though the quote refs cheated us out of that game.
Yeah, that was the other comment he made, referring to, what was that, I guess, 2021? I guess that would have been?
2021, Monday Night Football, yep.
Yeah, on the Cassius Marsh taunting penalty there, which, still rubs him the wrong way, but that's all. He also called Pittsburgh one of his top 3 favorite away venues to play. He loved the crowd. He didn't love the refs, but he loved the crowd that day, so that also got some attention in Steelers circles.
It certainly did. And it was interesting that 2 of his 3 were NFC North places. So, and then all of a sudden, the one place he's played one time in his career lands in that top 3. So Pittsburgh certainly had an impact. That is for sure. And that has people buzzing.
For sure. So won't belabor the quarterback buzz and speculation too much more because, again, it's going to be talked about a lot with the combine. How many rumors and everyone gets together, how much speculation is going to come out. So I'm sure we'll talk about it a million times more. It'll be really interesting. And Dave and I will have a conversation, I assume, before this occurs. But again, on Tuesday, I believe at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time, Omar Khan will be speaking to the media at the combine. And I'm sure he'll be peppered with questions about the quarterback situation. We've heard from Mike Tomlin. We've heard from Art Rooney II about the quarterback situation. We have not heard from Omar Khan about his outlook on the quarterback situation. I would expect him to say similar things to what Tomlin and Rooney have said, but I still want to hear what he says and how he says it and all that kind of stuff for more additional information to kind of figure out where this team's head is at when it comes to the quarterback position and Kenny Pickett's future.
Yeah, and I hope he kind of does one of those side sessions with Pittsburgh media as well, because it seems like he might be not looser, but a little more forthcoming in those sessions. Whereas when he speaks at the podium, he's in front of, a bunch of national reporters, a bunch of faces he's not quite familiar with. So he might be a little more buttoned up there. But yeah, I want to hear what he has to say about the quarterback position. I want to see how he says it, how he reacts to certain questions, how he talks about Kenny Pickett or Mason Rudolph or, the perspective of going out and getting one of these veterans, though he can't mention them by name, just talking about the quarterback position in general. So hopefully, as you mentioned, he's going to talk at, I believe, 10:30 on Tuesday. I'm sure that'll be broadcast on NFL Network. And then hopefully he does a side session with Pittsburgh media like he did last year that our Joe Clark was able to get in on. And hopefully he's a little more forthcoming in that type of session because Omar's still kind of growing into his role as GM when it comes to talking to the media.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll see. That'll be the big story. I mean, the combine itself will be huge, which I think starts Thursday. I believe the testing begins and runs through either Sunday or Monday. I believe Monday is what it typically is done in the past. But Tuesday will be, I think, a really important date to hear from Omar Khan because we've not really heard from Khan since last summer. Last time we really got to hear from him. I mean, obviously, it's not atypical. The GM doesn't speak that often, but we've not heard from him in quite some time.
Yeah, I think the last did he do McAfee during the season?
No, because that was when he announced. Well, he announced a Trubisky signing, and that's right. Before the season began. I don't think he did it mid. Yeah, did he do it mid-season? Because didn't Tomlin?
Yeah, because Tomlin popped in. Yeah, that was mid-season because I remember they were wearing hoodies. So,
right.
Yeah, so we haven't heard from him. He didn't do an end of season, which isn't out of the norm, but we haven't heard him yet. So it'll be very interesting to hear his thoughts on the season in general and specifically the quarterback position, because that, whether people like it or not, is the largest story for the Steelers now and moving forward.
All right, to kind of wrap things up today, I know we didn't discuss this in our 2-hour pre-production meeting that we had, but are you working on any draft profiles or anybody new that you want to talk about and kind of give some info on, since the combine is just around the corner?
Yeah, I know it's not a position of need for the Steelers, but I've always kind of been fascinated with edge rushers, and two guys that I'm looking at here right now that will be at the combine. Xavier Thomas from Clemson. He was the number one player in the country coming out of high school back in, I believe, 2018. Went to Clemson, never really lived up to expectations, got hurt in 2019, 2020. He put on Twitter recently that he was battling depression and put on some weight, and it really affected his 2020 and 2021 seasons. But this past year, 2023, was really solid for him. He was outstanding at the Shrine Bowl. Just looks like a completely different athlete out there. A little undersized, but the guy can rush the passer, and he showed that throughout the week in Dallas. And then another one that myself and Joe Clark really found ourselves just watching any chance we could get in Dallas was, I'm gonna butcher it, so I apologize, but Iyabe Amon Okoye, I believe, is his name, from Charlotte. It's a doozy of a name, so I apologize to the listeners out there that are shaking their head. I'm sorry, Iyabe Oki Anoma, that's his name. So edge from Charlotte. He played at 5 different colleges in his career. He was the number 3. Yeah, he was the number 3 prospect in the country, in the same class as Xavier Thomas. He started out at Alabama. Then he went to 2 smaller schools. I believe he went the JUCO route at one point, wound up at Michigan, and then followed Biff Poggi, I believe, is the coach that's at Charlotte. So he followed him to Charlotte for a year. And I mean, this guy, freakish athlete off the edge. He was a former 5-star. The ability is still there. He's just kind of on the older side. But those are 2 names that I have found myself watching where I'm just like, these guys are kind of the next wave at the position. But I've also been watching a lot of linebackers in general, just because I've kind of been, banging the drum that that's a position of need. So, look for Oki Anoma and Xavier Thomas here in the next couple of days.
The Charlotte kid, what was his production like? Was it good, at least this past year at Charlotte?
Yeah, I want to say he had 9 sacks. I'm pulling up, Joe did the story on him. I'm going to pull up the story, but yeah, the production was very impressive. He went from Michigan, where he was kind of a rotational player, to a star. 4.5 sacks at Michigan in 2022. And then only 5.5 sacks, but he had a ton of pressures. So checked in at 6'0", 253 pounds. So he's more of your traditional stand-up edge pass rusher. He can play with his hand in the dirt at times. But yeah, he's been all over the place. He's got the pedigree of a former, high-end recruit. So that's a name that, he blew us away in Dallas, and his college tape at Charlotte is pretty intriguing. Is
he going to be one of those mid-round guys that, someone's going to bet on traits and tools?
I think so. 4th, 5th round is kind of, I have him pegged in the 4th right now, but I do think that 4th, 5th round, maybe some of those questions about, hey, why did you move around so much in college he's going to be asked that at the combine. I mean, he's going to have an answer for that. The move from Michigan to Charlotte was very clear why he did it. Like he said to us, he followed Biff Poggi. So that was it, but going from Alabama and falling off there and then kind of going the JUCO route and all that, he's going to have to answer for some of that. But 4th round guy, another Charlotte product,
right?
I think he's going to have a nice career,
and apparently be a great combine too if he's testing the way that he kind of maybe projects and was kind of thought as that top recruit out of high school.
Yeah, I think you're going to hear a lot of buzz around his name coming out of Indy here in the next week. I think him and Xavier Thomas are going to blow up the combine when it comes to just some of the athletic numbers that they put up. I fully expect their relative athletic scores, or RAS as everyone knows it, to be sky high.
For sure, for sure. So good thought to watch for. Maybe not the biggest need for Pittsburgh, but still, never know what could happen there. And there may be some value. Pittsburgh has 2 4th-round picks, so we'll see what they ultimately do with those selections. I was by the time that this podcast goes up, the report will be up on Spencer Rattler, the quarterback from South Carolina. Again, not that I'm necessarily expecting Pittsburgh to draft a quarterback, but this is a more realistic name to discuss than obviously in the top 3 names, and probably even more realistic than a Bo Nix in the early rounds, maybe even more so than Michael Penix. And Rattler, I think, is a really accurate quarterback, short, intermediate routes. Obviously, he's athletic. He can extend the play. He keeps his eyes downfield. He's got a compact, fluid motion. I think the upper body mechanics are sound. I think he did get better throughout his college career. Obviously, it was a little turbulent going from Oklahoma to South Carolina, and just kind of the ups and downs of his career. But I did think he improved throughout. The ball placement's really strong. Some people have said he's got a really big arm, and the arm talent's like overwhelmingly good. I didn't see that. I don't think the velocity is fantastic. I don't think the zip is there to really drive the football. Some of the far hash throws he tried to make were undercut and jumped. He's got to be more consistent with his decision making and not locking on to some reads. He can, scan and go through full field reads, but he will sometimes lock onto that primary target and miss underneath zone defenders. You watch the Clemson game from 2022, just 3 miserable interceptions, all because of that reason. So I think he's, more developmental. He's got to be a more consistent quarterback. There are some intriguing kind of tools and traits, and again, the accuracy is one of his better strengths to his game. So I think he'll be in that day 2 conversation. Where on day 2, it's hard to say, maybe a bit more 3rd round, but interesting guy with an interesting backstory.
Yeah, and you mentioned those far hash throws. That's kind of what he struggled with at Oklahoma. He was coming out of high school. He was on that, I think it was a QB1 Netflix show. He was a big star in high school, 5-star recruit. He lit it up at the high school level, and then he got to college and was like, oh, maybe my arm isn't the best. And he had to learn the hard way. But yeah, I think that from 2022 to 23, just watching him live at South Carolina, it felt like 2023, he took that step forward. Seeing some of the highlights from the Senior Bowl, hearing from, guys that were down there, including you and Jonathan and all that, what you saw from him, it's intriguing. And he's kind of that QB2, QB3 developmental guy at the next level for a few years, just based off the pedigree that he's had and the experience that he has at the college level. So definitely looking forward to reading your report on him. He's been a guy that I've kind of circled as a potential option for the Steelers if they went the draft route.
Right. No, I didn't go to the Senior Bowl, but I wish that I did, because he was the MVP
right.
there.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I had been going, but I know there were some good reports down there. I mean, I know at both the Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl, the quarterback rooms overall were not getting glowing remarks. I think it's hard to be in that situation there with new guys, new playbook. You have no chemistry with any of these receivers and new coaching staff. I mean, I think more often than not, I'm never really surprised when a quarterback doesn't look great in that environment. I mean, it's 3 days of practice. It's a game. I mean, it's not really conducive to, I think, quarterback success. But I mean, Rattler seemed to be one of the better ones and was the Senior Bowl MVP. So that's worthy, I think, of noting when a guy can excel in, I think, difficult circumstances like that. Yeah, it was QB1. Forget what the tagline was, but QB1 was that Netflix show, and he got suspended, I think, right at the end of his senior year. That was a big controversy. Still no clarity on what it was. He was not suspended from school, and there was nothing on his permanent record. It was just suspended from the football team for some sort of district code violation. Probably doesn't matter a lot now. There are, and I didn't put this on the negative on the report, but there are some who seem to think that he's got an abrasive personality, a little arrogant. I don't know how true that is, but when you go to the combine and meet with teams, I'm sure that'll be kind of one thing they'll be looking for, is kind of the vibe and the feel of his personality and makeup. I think that matters a ton for the quarterback position. So that'll be one thing to hear if we hear any kind of feedback on how he's interviewing and talking with teams.
Yeah, I hope he has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder after everything he's kind of been through, going from that, thought of as can't miss guy at Oklahoma, he's going to be the next Lincoln Riley product, to losing his job and having to transfer. I hope he has a little bit of a chip and is a little abrasive, but
Yeah, but some were saying like he was arrogant. I don't know. There's apparently just a reputation. I don't follow the college football landscape as much as others, but there were some who said, well, who knows? I'm not saying that for sure.
I know he came off very, very poorly in the QB1 show. He came off as very cocky and disrespectful to his high school coach, and it was not a good look for him. I'm sure if he could do it over again, he'd go back and not be part of the show because it did not paint him in a good light at all. But we'll see how he interviews. And to your point about the QBs at the All-Star games, these Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, that's a discussion that myself and Joe and Dr. Mel had down in Dallas. Like the 2 years that we were in Vegas, you had Brock Purdy come out of it in 2022, and then 2023, Tommy DeVito and Aiden O'Connell. They looked awful the entire week, and then they get to the NFL, and it's like there's something to work with here. So it's a very difficult situation to go in. You don't know how guys want to run certain routes or how they get in and out of their breaks, how they time things up. So it's hard to take too much from it. But when it comes to Rattler, I think he improved his stock a bit at the Senior Bowl just based off of what people have been saying.
Yeah. And now, to be fair with that show, I mean, he was 17.
Yeah. I wouldn't read too much into it, but it's out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fair point, and it's still a reputation that's followed him. The end, I think the college football landscape has humbled him throughout his career, the highs and lows of it. So I'm not saying what he was before is what he is now, but one thing to look for. But the report is out. I was trying to find, do you like NFL comps? Do you like in your reports or just hearing generally about, the NFL comp, the prospect of the current or former NFL player?
I do like to. It depends. If one comes to me and it's like I can't get off of that, I'll include it. Mm-hmm. But I don't always try to come up with a comp for guys. But I'm curious if you have one for Rattler.
I was struggling with it because I start with the size. I mean, I think you got to find somebody who's got a similar body type and build. I think somebody had compared Rattler to Jordan Love, and I can kind of get that from the way that they play. But I mean, Love is a taller. He's like 6'4" or something, I think, and Rattler is barely 6 foot. I think he weighed in at 6'01" at the Senior Bowl. So, really kind of borderline on the height requirements. So that kind of limited the number of quarterbacks that I could go off of that were in that category. I thought about some Brock Purdy because I kind of thought, there's an accuracy element to him that's a positive. The arm strength isn't overwhelming, but I do think Purdy was kind of a better above the neck and just better decision maker overall. This one, and I try not to do things where there's kind of a school tie-in because it does feel a little obvious and almost lazy. But the first thing that came to mind, and I just couldn't escape it, was Baker Mayfield. Now, I do think Rattler's a little more accurate overall, but just in terms of decision-making, a little hit and miss, and athletic, but not Justin Fields, Lamar Jackson athletic. And again, that personality, a little brash, a little arrogant, but, you can utilize that in a positive way if you do so appropriately. And then, obviously the height standpoint, the size standpoint to me, Baker's arm might be a bit better and Rattler a bit more accurate, but I went with a Baker Mayfield comp for Spencer Rattler. That's
actually pretty solid. Yeah. I mean, when you talk about personality, they kind of line up, at least based on reputation with Rattler. I haven't done a ton of studying on him the way you did, but yeah, Baker he's always been that guy that's come off with the chip on his shoulder, abrasive. You're on his team, you love him. You're against him, you hate him. That's a good comp. I'm curious to read your report and kind of watch Rattler a bit closer. But I would say Baker probably has a better arm. But I do like that comp a lot, especially because they line up size wise. That's solid.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of where I begin. Looking at some names and then try to find somebody who's doesn't have to be exact, but in that range. I like NFL comps. I don't want to be beholden to them, but they're just a good framework for me, especially if I don't know a player as well, just to kind of get something in my head about what that might look like. So I don't like to lean on them too much, but I do like providing comps for my profiles because I think it helps me kind of just in a one sentence way to describe a guy, the good, the bad. NFL comp is, I think, a good way just to start thinking about what a prospect, what his makeup is like. And I don't use comps to necessarily say this is exactly what their career will look like, but just from a style standpoint, how they play and kind of, a rough approximation of their strengths and weaknesses, what that compares to. That's how I use NFL comps.
I think that's where people get lost is that if you say Josh Allen is Ben Roethlisberger, people are like, oh, so he's a Hall of Famer. Like, no, it's same style, similar traits. Like that's where people get caught up. And I think that's a discussion for another time, but that's how I like to use comps, is the style, not, okay, he's going to have, a Tom Brady career or whatever it may be. Like that's the important factor that needs to be remembered when it comes to comps.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And obviously I'm never going to use a 7th round guy and use him as a comp to an all-pro type of player. There's going to be something inbounds and some sort of, guardrails. But yeah, I use NFL comps to talk about traits and style more so than this is the exact career path this guy will follow.
Yeah, I was just looking. Yeah, okay. So my Edgerrin Cooper profile, the linebacker out of Texas A&M, I said he reminds me very much of Miami's Jerome Baker. And people were like, "Oh, Jerome Baker was a 3rd round pick." Are you saying? And it's like, no, like it's similar size, similar style. And Baker has turned out to be a good pro, but I'm not saying because I comped Cooper to Baker that he's going to have Jerome Baker's career be a 3rd round pick and all that. It's just style, and people forget that. So they see name and say, okay,
right.
You're saying Edgerrin Cooper is hypothetically Ryan Shazier, so you're expecting a all-pro caliber linebacker. No, I think I even mentioned Fred Warner at one point in my story, just play style, and people were saying, "Oh, so he's Fred Warner. That's what you're expecting." That's where people get lost, and I'm glad you brought that up, as to that's how you use the comps, because that's important for people to know.
You're right. Yeah, it is. And so we'll do that. And we're already up to, I think, around 100 draft profiles. And so we're going to try to have the most ever we've ever had in a year for Steelers Depot. I think we did 272 last year. Yeah. So our goal is to beat that. And I think we're already well on our way.
Yeah, for sure. The team is doing an awesome job. And I know we've got some new faces that are helping us out this year that are really, really putting together some comprehensive profiles and helping readers learn about these guys.
And us and myself.
Yeah, well, yeah, that too.
Learn about all these guys either, that's for sure. All right, Josh, any other final thoughts, any other topics that we did not discuss that we should touch on before we get out of here?
No, I don't have anything else, Alex. It's kind of a slow time right now, but things are going to pick up next week with the Combine, and excited to see the coverage that Jonathan, Joe, and Ross provide us.
Absolutely. All right. So wrap things up. Again, I believe that Dave will be back for Monday's show. We'll record that during Monday morning, and we'll kind of get Dave's thoughts here and get ready for the Combine. So you can follow Josh on Twitter by Josh Carney. You can follow myself on Twitter @Alex_Kozora. Follow Dave on Twitter @Steelers Depot. You want to send an email to the show, drop us a line. You can do so at theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.